I worked for a guy named Lloyd Mintz and a guy named John Gilday, who empowered me as a 22-year-old executive to go and to do something that had never been done in the toy business, which was to have a toy company license the toy business to other toy companies.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Craft Podcast. Today, I am joined by Stone Newman, who most recently was the Chief Revenue Officer for pocket.watch. Welcome, Stone.
Thanks, John. Love being here. Appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really excited to speak to you because we've primarily had guests in the digital entertainment and tech space, and we have one scientist. But we haven't had anyone cover the world of licensing / consumer products. So that's really the first question for you. What is your craft? What do you think? How do you define your craft?
Yeah, I think that I define my professional craft as being an expert in brand and franchise building through licensing, which is really the ultimate way to extend and expand a brand that serves to support consumer affinity, right? Because that's like in a nutshell, right? Like, okay, when does a brand get to expand, right? When they built a level of consumer loyalty that a consumer is going to be like, oh, you know what? I like this core product that it's known for, but I like the brand or the IP or the extension that I want to then expand my universe with my wallet.
So I'm glad you laid it out this way. So we're going to cover really two topics. We're going to talk about franchises and then licensing. So let's talk about franchising. You know, when I think about that word, I primarily think about entertainment properties. Like the first company probably to many people's minds, like Disney.
Sure.
And I kind of understand how they're doing franchising because they're doing it at like the highest level. But not every company is Disney. What are your thoughts on how maybe just a little bit smaller or medium-sized brands, like at what scale can you even pursue a franchise strategy?
You know, listen, I think where you have to look at sort of dividing the universe is not so much by size and scale. Like, I mean, yes, the bigger you are, right, the more clout you have, the more, leverage you have, more consumer affinity. But the line of demarcation for me is you have entertainment, right? Entertainment IP. And that can be like very, very broad, right? It could be music based, it could be film franchise, TV, now creator based, right? And then you have brand extension, right? And brand is more consumer products based or brands. And that can be everything from automotive brands to soup brands to paper towel brands, right? Like, so those are like in the licensing industry, like the way people really look at it is they look at entertainment and they look at consumer brands.
Great. Let's talk about consumer brands then, because I've always thought about this. Some of the biggest brands, they always sell like keychains and hats, and I want to understand like just how like what is the size and scope of this business? I'll give an example. Like I always think about like Ferrari, right? They've got great cars, but I just my feeling, I've never looked at the data. Ferrari merchandise seems to do quite well, and they have Ferrari everything. Like,
yeah.
How big is this business roughly?
Look, it's billions and billions of dollars, right, in revenue, and I can, and really, the snap of my finger, I should know the size and scale of my industry. And before I became semi-retired after leaving pocket.watch in April, and I'm been enjoying my time off, I would have been a little sharper. But it is a multi-billion-dollar business, and these consumer brands, like you talk about, like Ferrari or Jeep or BMW, like you're right, they have massive programs in licensing with things that that you would naturally think of, right? Like automotive extensions and things like that. But you also see these brands going into lots of other categories just because they have that deep consumer loyalty, and it's twofold. It's I own a Ferrari and I'm the Ferrari guy, so I'm going to have everything Ferrari. Or it's like Joey Tribbiani from Friends, right? There's that classic episode, right, with Joey where he's, pretends that he has a Porsche. And like, I don't know if you ever saw that episode, but like he was standing in front of a Porsche parked on the street and a pretty girl walks by. And she's like, "Oh, is that your Porsche?" He's like, "Yeah, it's my Porsche." And so he's like standing in front of it, like Porsche hat, Porsche shirt, like pretending to be the Porsche guy, right? So there's the pure aspiration, and that's on like high quality brands, like high end prestige brands. But then you've got, the P&Gs, the Church and Dwights, those guys that choose that, hey, we're in a manufacturing business, but we're going to not choose to manufacture everything. We're going to actually license it out, right? Like you look at like brands like Arm and Hammer, right? Which baking soda, and we all know it, but like they have massive licensing programs in like the pet area, right? Again, if you're a consumer, you're like, oh, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to put Arm and Hammer baking soda in my fridge because I'm trained since, I saw my mom do it, who saw her mom do it. So I know that, whenever I move into a place, first thing you do is you buy, Arm and Hammer and you put it in the fridge and like, oh, if I have a cat, hey, that same level of freshness, well, that makes sense to buy Arm and Hammer kitty litter. And there's the benefit of the investment that these big CPG companies make in marketing, where they build that brand and they establish that brand, and then they can extend it into other areas and generate significant profitable revenue.
Okay, this is so interesting. So I'm gonna jump around a bit. So, who are the players in the licensing space? Is it like licensees, licensors, manufacturers, or
Yeah.
are some of them the same people?
To a degree, and I'm going to break it down, talk about all the role players, but one of the best things that ever happened in the licensing business, and one of the worst things, was Shark Tank. Because before Shark Tank, like most people had no idea, right? No idea about licensing. Like they didn't really, but so many of those conversations, especially with Damon, it's always like, and we're going to license it, right? Like so it sort of became a little bit, in the regular vernacular of Joe Consumer. But so to break it down, okay, you have licensor, who is the rights owner, the rights holder. So they are the person who underline owns all of the rights to the brand, the property, the characters, everything associated with it. A licensee, so what that licensor do is they will then license, give permission to use those rights for other things. So if I'm Church and Dwight, I license, give the rights to, whoever the company is that's making the kitty litter, and the kitty litter company is the licensee. In the case of a Disney, they're the licensor across their vast library of intellectual property and movies and TV franchise and everything under the sun. And then a toy company like Hasbro, who is a big partner of Disney at many levels, who makes everything from Disney princess dolls to Star Wars toys to Marvel action figures. They are the licensee. And the way the transaction works is the licensee, they're responsible for the manufacturing, the inventory, the selling it to the retailers or to the consumers if it's a direct to consumer model, which is a little bit of a newer thing, right? And ultimately they're responsible for if it fails, right? And for those rights and that privilege, they pay a percentage of their sales, of not the retail sale, but of the sale price to the retailer. They pay a percentage of that back to the intellectual property owner. So, and the reason they're paying this royalty is they're saying, well, okay, a lot of people know Spider-Man because Disney Marvel is doing a great job with that franchise, putting out movies, constantly putting out content, keeping it in the consumer zeitgeist. So that's worth my paying for it. Oh, I'm going to take a license from Procter and Gamble for Febreze because P&G is always on TV and always promoting Febreze. So that's brand value. The licensor, the benefit for them is that they basically just collect a royalty, right? So they have to keep building their brand, but they don't have any of the responsibility associated with manufacturing, selling to retailers, distributing, which in this current climate with the global shipping crisis is creating lots of economic havoc for lots of people. It's a good business to be in, right? Now, the grass is always greener. Like you'll have people that will be like, I can't believe that I'm only collecting, and the royalty rates, like they can range from 6%, right, on a very low end on a corporate brand, up to like 16, 17% on a Disney-esque entertainment property. But what you'll often see is someone will be like, you know what? I have the hottest thing and I should be making the manufacturer's margin. And I can't believe this. It's my IP. But at the end of the day, the manufacturer takes all the risk in the event that it doesn't sell. And then you have to mark it down and you have to fund that and dealing with all of that. I'll tell you, I first got into the licensing business in kind of a unique and an interesting way. And I think that my journey, if you can indulge me to talk about my beginning journey, is I think it will, I think it paints an interesting picture of what can be done with licensing and with brand extension. So in 1997, I graduated Union College in Schenectady, New York. 2 days after graduation, I drove to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I started working for Hasbro Toys. They had acquired Kenner Parker, and they still had an office in Cincinnati. And I was hired on as a marketing intern for Nerf. And about 5 days or a week after I'd been there, Hasbro had a big corporate reorg and brands moved around, and brands from Rhode Island, where Hasbro's corporate headquarters were, came to Cincinnati because they were the brands that were deemed struggling. And the perception was that the marketing team in Cincinnati, could fix it. And so Tonka was a brand that came with it. And the woman who is the director of marketing, my first boss and an amazing boss, Betsy Gordon-Laco. Betsy was the director of marketing on Nerf, and she moved over to become the director of marketing on Tonka. And she said to me, hey, Stone, do you want to stay on Nerf or do you want to come with me on Tonka? She's like, I could use your experience because you have wheels experience. And by that, you're like thinking, Stone, what kind of wheels experience could you have? You graduated college 7 days ago. But the summer before my senior in college, I interned at a toy company in Jersey. I lived in Philly, a company called Tyco, and I worked for a summer on the Matchbox brand. So I had 7 weeks more experience than Betsy did on wheels. And, the aspiring young executive that I saw that there was a director of marketing and no one, and me, and Nerf, there was like brand manager and assistant product manager. And I was like, Betsy, you're right. You need the wheels experience. So I went to join her in marketing on Tonka. I mean, it's a great brand, right? As a consumer, you love this brand, right? And you think like, oh my God, Tonka, it's everything. But in 1997, it was completely upside down. It was generating low 8 figures in volume, and it was losing low 7 figures. So it was an unprofitable brand. And for a big, huge corporation, that is like, well, how do I continue to invest to fix this brand if it's losing money, right? But again, it's a great consumer brand. So the first series of customer previews, right, and this is late 90s, so you have Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, 2 consecutive meetings happen. Walmart comes in, and the most important vehicle buyer in the country at the time, a guy named Fran Craven, comes in, and he says to the Tonka marketing team, which included me and the sales force from Hasbro, you guys are screwing up this brand. You guys are screwing it up royally. The profitability stinks. There's no innovation. And I can get the same product from Nylint and Fundrise, and I don't even need the Tonka brand. It doesn't mean anything to the consumer. So you can imagine how well that went over with Hasbro. So 2 days later, Toys R Us comes in. There used to be a company here in the US, a retailer called Toys R Us, right? So it's sad they're gone. So, but they were in 1997, very important. Toys R Us comes in, and second most important vehicle buyer in the country comes in, a guy named Greg Zampino. And he says, you guys are screwing up the brand. I love Tonka. The consumer loves Tonka. The margin stinks. There's no innovation. There's just not enough product. If there was enough product, I would give you 40 feet. So what do? You got Walmart saying this brand is dead. I don't even need it. So you can't invest in it. You got Toys R Us saying, I would give you all this space. So ultimately what happened was I was living in Cincinnati, and as a East Coast guy, after about 5 months in Cincinnati, I was ready to head back east. And I reached out to the licensing group in Rhode Island. And I said, listen, hi, I'm Stone Newman, been with the company 5 months. I'd like to come to Rhode Island. I'd like to work for you in the licensing group. And look, now Hasbro is a massive licensing company with hundreds of people. But at the time, the licensing department was 7 people, and it sat next to the legal department. And again, I had a series of very good bosses. And I said to the guys, I said, look, you need me because there's this huge conundrum with Tonka. And Tonka is unprofitable. And Walmart's about to throw it out. And Toys R Us wants more product. And the only solution is licensing, because I had come out of college where I'd taken a couple of business classes, and I had read and learned about companies like Warnaco, who made all of the underwear for Calvin Klein. Calvin Klein was the marketing company. The actual maker of Calvin Klein underwear was a licensee, a company called Warnaco. So I sort of took the leap, saying, well, why can't you do the same thing in the toy business? Why does Hasbro have to make all the toys? Why can't you license this brand? And so I pitched this to the guys in Rhode Island, and they were like, yeah, you know what? We like that idea. Why don't you come join us? And again, I worked for a guy named Lloyd Mintz and a guy named John Gilday, who empowered me as a 22-year-old executive to go and to do something that had never been done in the toy business, which was to have a toy company license the toy business to other toy companies. And so I went around, and in a period of 2 years, we took the brand from a unprofitable brand doing low 8 figures at retail, through licensing with basically 4 companies, took it to where it was doing mid to low 9 figures at retail and generating upwards of high 7, low 8 figures in royalties, in pure profit. And we eventually moved where Hasbro, we were basically empowered where any brands that were doing less than $50 million, like we were permitted to license. So like we took this treasure trove of Hasbro IP, Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toy, Play School, and we started licensing them to other toy companies. And for me, it was a really eye-opening thing, because I thought I was going to always want to work in marketing. And in fact, when I was leaving Cincinnati to go to Rhode Island, an executive at Hasbro, very senior executive on the marketing guy, he sat me down and he said, Stone, you're making the worst career decision of your life. He said, licensing is the underbelly of our industry. It's like they're basically used car salesmen. And he's like, you're here at Kenner, you're in Cincinnati, you should, work here for a few years, get an MBA, go to P&G and learn traditional brand marketing. But I didn't see it as that. I saw it as a unique and ultimate way to extend and expand your brand, and just a different kind of marketing that was transactionally driven. And it opened my eyes in such a big way that in a matter of basically 2 retail life cycles, you could change the narrative 100%, and you could turn an entire brand around through licensing. And with basically the investment of a junior licensing guy who was making like $36,000 a year. Like that was like the investment that Hasbro basically had to make at that stage, was to open up a position on the licensing group for a assistant toy licensing manager.
Okay, I have so many questions for you. So why did the other toy companies want to be a licensee for Tonka? Is it because it's even harder to build the initial brand, even though it's out of
harder to build an initial? So the companies that we went to, so they were guys that were selling Walmart just generic vehicles, right? And basically it's a company called Fundrise who had great electronic light and sound vehicles, but and it was, and okay, so their dump truck, against a Tonka dump truck, it was for them, it was getting that brand. And now all of a sudden the retailer was thrilled because they were getting the margins that they liked from the non-Hasbro company. They were getting the brand that the consumer wanted because, a brand like Tonka with 50 years of heritage, right? And people, in the late 90s, they still remembered those commercials from the 70s with like the elephant standing in the bed of the dump truck, which, little known secret, like that would not pass advertising standards today because they actually filled that dump truck the underneath with cement, because otherwise the elephant would have crushed it. But so for that, the licensee, that's the value, right? They get this brand that is promoted and has historically been promoted, that a consumer knows, and that and they'll get more shelf space and more dollars. And then what we also did was we expanded Tonka into new categories that we had never been in before. We went after Matchbox. We did 1/64th scale die cast like vehicles. It was like a natural extension for a brand like that, for a vehicle brand.
And are companies like Fundrise, I know they make less margins, but are you also betting that just by giving it to more companies, there's like more innovation? Like, why is there more innovation out there versus like in a company like Hasbro, right?
I think that I think it's about investment. Hasbro is one of the most innovative companies out there, right? Like they make great toys, right? They work with the best inventors, but the reality is it's like the 80-20 rule of anything, right? Like, you're a $4 billion, and this is in the 90s, Hasbro was about a $4 billion company, right? Are you going to invest your resources in your $500 million brand or your $5 million brand? If you're going to invest in an early advanced R&D, where is that going to get that return? Especially when Walmart is saying, we don't even want Tonka anymore, right? We don't even want Play School anymore. And it proves that it's a great way for a company to keep their brand's relevance, to actually extend and expand it, right? Because now, you find someone else to go into the die-cast business and you're just reaping those rewards, and you don't have to make that investment, right? So that's one of the huge benefits. And again, the licensee, they get the benefit of having that IP that the consumer knows so well. And to me, like Tonka is, even though there's been Tonka Entertainment and various things, Tonka is a consumer brand, right? That is less Spider-Man and Mickey Mouse. That is more, frankly, like Febreze, because it's just historical and brand with a lot of nostalgia.
So, okay, you also brought up Walmart, which I think is another player. So it's like the buyers.
Yeah.
As a buyer, is it like, maybe it's not like all financial, but I feel like, yeah, financial is part of it, like margins, but do they get to, as a buyer, do their like personal interests and tastes play into it? Like, oh, I've never heard this brand before.
No,
give them a shot.
Listen, so full disclosure, I've never been a buyer. I did work for a retailer in college. I was a yo-yo demonstrator at FAO Schwartz in college, but I had zero input whatsoever in these stores. So I've never worked for a retailer. I've never been a buyer. So I can only speak to my experience over the past 25 years on the other side of the table as a seller, right? A seller is a manufacturer, a seller is a licensor, as a brand owner. I think like anything and everything, I think it is really personal preference. I think that there are some buyers who are better than others because they are willing to roll the dice, right? And try something new. And there are those who are like, I'm going to coast and I'm going to just like, so my friend Stephen Cohen, who is one of the greatest licensing executives in the industry, he owned the Halloween company Disguise, and he was president of Disguise. And now he has a licensing consulting practice. He's part of a company called Branch Annuity, but he's, a mentor of mine. And Stephen is on the buy side. So companies hire him to go acquire licenses for them, right? That's the other thing, is there's all these other sub industries. So a company will be like, okay, Stephen, you source the market and you tell me what licenses that I should get. And Stephen often says that, hey, no one ever got fired for recommending Disney, right? It's like, when there's a new Disney movie that comes out or Space Jam comes out, nobody's going to lose their job on that one because it's safe. It may not work, right? And sometimes those movies don't work, but it's like, okay, well, there's 100 other licensees and the plan says it should work. So I think that with buyers that, you run into that. And listen, when I was at Pocket Watch, right, and we built Ryan, and which what you and I, how we met, right, working on the Ryan franchise together, like those early days when I was out there, like people were like, Stone, what are you talking about? It's a kid who plays with other people's toys. Like, we don't get it. This is not a brand, right? And like the first 8 months of Pocket Watch, I was just constantly getting no, 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 no. But I saw it, because to me it was like Ryan was no different than Mary-Kate and Ashley. And in fact, the person that I hired to ultimately do the creative, build the brand, do all of that early work, a woman named Judy Swartz, she was the person behind Mary-Kate and Ashley. It was just the celebrity had changed. The media had changed. And we got lucky. There was a buyer at Walmart, a guy named Brad Bedwell, young preschool buyer, who was like, you know what? This makes sense. I get it. I'm going to take a shot and I'm going to go for it. And there was this sort of consensus between Brad and his boss and his boss's boss that this is either going to be big or it's going to be a colossal disaster. And they're like, but we're going to go for it. And it wasn't like, we're going to put in 100 doors. They went for it in 3,000 stores, got behind it, and it proved to be transformational and big beyond everyone's wildest dreams. I mean, it's now approaching Mary-Kate and Ashley numbers. I mean, Mary-Kate and Ashley was $1 billion franchise in the late 90s. And that's where Ryan is evolved to.
Awesome. So let's talk about, because I feel like now let's talk about a little bit deeper about the craft of the licensor, because whether it was Tonka or Ryan, you had to do some convincing. Yeah. So what is the craft? Is the craft just business development? You had to persuade, persuasion is the craft?
I believe that the most important craft of a brand owner and a licensor is two things. One, strong retail relationships, right? Having the ability to, because at the end of the day, even though I was meeting with Walmart and Target and Amazon and Claire's and everyone in between and setting all of that up, the licensee was the one selling them. But if you were to speak to any of their licensees, they would say, no, Stone paved the road. Stone made it, Stone was in front of those buyers nonstop. So again, there are a lot of licenses. There are a lot of choices. People have only so much capital, so much investment. And if someone says, yeah, I have a program going into Walmart, well, okay, I'm going to, if the two brands look equal on paper, right, I'm going to, go with the one where the path to retail is the least resistant. So that to me is super important. And then support of the brand, right? How is a brand owner, right? Are you investing and are you marketing the brand? Because I think that's also the other misconception, right? Is, okay, hey, licensee, how are you advertising my brand? Well, wait a second. I'm paying you 15% royalty. And now you're telling me I need to spend more money on advertising because now it's like, well, wait, maybe I should. So if I have to spend 10% on advertising and I'm paying you 15% and if I'm going to spend 25% on, well, wait, shouldn't I just make my own brand? And then maybe I can ultimately license that out. I think that's you look at a company like MGA, like Isaac Larian, right? What he's done and continues to do is remarkable, right? And he builds brands, invests heavily in marketing, and then from there spins off massive consumer products licensing. He rarely takes third-party IP licenses because he feels that he can do it himself. So I think that's, to me, that is the 1-2 punch, which is the strength at retail and then the support you're giving to the brand. Now, The only twist on that, and that's where sometimes, and again, with legacy brands, like brands that are a little bit like kind of in mothballs somewhere, like Lincoln Logs, right? Like Lincoln Logs, when we at Hasbro did that deal, we licensed it to Connects. Like it was a nascent business. It was less than $3 million in revenue. Basically, Hasbro was selling one tin of Lincoln Logs, like a big tin with a bunch of logs, and that was it. And they were selling to like Toys R Us. So when we licensed that to Connects, we were like, look, you're taking the whole brand, but don't ask us what we Hasbro are doing to market it. Because but for someone like a Connects, that was exciting because they then almost viewed themselves as the brand owner, and the royalty rate was lower. And so it made sense. And they ultimately built that business up to where it was like, I think like 30, $40 million at retail. Like, and for a smaller company, that was significant. But if ultimately the social contract between licensor and licensee is, licensor is going to market the brand, licensee is going to manufacture product that is on brand and get it distributed and sold into retail. Oh, and by the way, I would love it if you, licensor, also help me get it into retail as well.
Two more fun questions, I guess, is the second you mentioned Cincinnati, I also thought of PNG.
Yep.
So is there a big, I don't know what to even call it, like consumer products industry built around that city just because PNG is there? Like,
yeah,
why was that toy company
because
there?
PNG is there, and because Dracket is there, and and there's some food companies there. And listen, classically trained marketers, like, which I am not, like, I think I'm a pretty good marketer, but I've, like, outside of my 3 years at Hasbro, like, I've been in startups, right? I had my own toy company, I had my own agency, I was president of Genius Brands, I was at Pocket.watch. Like, I think I'm a really good marketer and a really good franchise builder, but I am not, like, I do not have like P&G, like that classically trained consumer products marketing background. And I admire those people. And again, I think that there, especially when you're in those spaces where it's not so fashion, right? And that's also a big difference, right? Like Tide, like that's not like it's a massive business, but it's not sexy, or it doesn't all of a sudden, oh my God, Tide is so cool. Like I'm going to switch detergents, right? Like the reality is, like, you probably, until you get married, which I found out, right? Like you buy the detergent that you had at home as a kid, right? Like I used to buy cold water all because that was what was in the laundry room, and I had to do laundry, and that was what I knew until I got married and my wife was a Tide house, and she's like, we're buying Tide. And I was like, okay, no problem. Right. That's not the fight over detergent. So yeah. So places like Cincinnati, Ohio, where you have these massive CPG companies, that are based there. It's like, and the talent pool is really deep and really big there. But I will tell you, I do have, but there is a way that you can take those brands and do fun things with licensing. So one of the things that I'm really proud of in my career was when I had my agency, we had a client out of the UK. We had a technology company that had a microencapsulation technology, which was a way that you could infuse scent and skincare actives into textiles that were extremely wash durable and long lasting. And so I got involved with these guys, and I actually built a consumer brand for them around their company name called Solescence. And we licensed the technology to companies, and we required them to put it on their packaging. And what we put together was, we did a deal with Springs Industries, who is a leading player in the linens business, in pillows and mattress pads. And then we helped them get a license from Procter & Gamble for Febreze, because with our technology, they could take the fragrance of Febreze and the malodor control and put it in the pillows. And for about 3 years, we had the number one selling pillow at Walmart that was a Febreze branded pillow. The guys at Springs, like, the idea of scented pillows, like, they were like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. They're like, why would anyone want to buy a scented pillow? And all of a sudden we said, well, what if that scent could eliminate odor and could be the scent of Febreze and deliver Febreze freshness? So in that scenario, we basically were like, well, look, our tech can deliver all of the attributes of what P&G puts out in their advertising, and we can help you get the license. And we worked with P&G's agency and we demonstrated the tech worked. And all of a sudden, it was a very natural brand extension that was super successful. And I think you've seen more in the past. Like this is, I think, one of the things that's to me the most interesting. And you've seen a lot of brands over the past 20 years remove the handcuffs. So it used to be that a brand owner was like super concerned about being perceived as bastardizing their brand. And like, and they were so concerned about how precious the brand was that they didn't want to have a negative consumer perception. And so it didn't matter the money that could come in. They thought, well, this extension is terrible. And I'll give you an example of one of those that was like when I was at Hasbro. One of the deals that I didn't really have anything to do with it other than I sat in the licensing department. It was my boss's deal. It was one of the biggest deals in the history of Hasbro. And it was the biggest fight ever. It was Monopoly slot machines. And it was one of the first licensed slot machines. But internally, there was this consumers will hate us. Monopoly is family gaming. How could we ever do this? And the licensing guys, Lloyd and John, pushed it through, and it threw off telephone digits and royalties. So what you've seen brand marketers and brand owners become a little bit less precious. So like now when you walk in and you see Glad trash bags infused with Gain, okay? And that's interesting, right? Because Gain, like people love, Gain is known for fragrance, right? It's known for freshness. And, 20 years ago, a product manager at P&G would have been like, there is no way I'm putting my brand on garbage bags. It's like putting my brand in the garbage, right? But now all of a sudden they see, no, it's just another touch point to that consumer. Girl Scouts of America is like another great licensing story, right? For years, like they had very, very little licensing. They were very precious and protective of their brand, as they should be. And finally, a guy named Michael Carlisle at the Wildflower Group, who was their licensing agent, like worked tirelessly to get them to start to expand Girl Scout cookies into things like a deal with Nestle, where you had Girl Scout cookie candy bars, and Coffee Mate, where you had Girl Scout cookie flavored coffee mix-ins. And so, and you've seen this evolution where, and look, people love the revenue. That to them is proven to the upside. But I think the scale is tipped that whereas licensing is no longer seen as a used car salesman, it's seen as strategic expansion of your brands. And look at Pocket Watch, the whole model, right? The whole initial pitch was, we as a company are going to take and treat the biggest stars of YouTube the way Disney treats Mickey Mouse and Nickelodeon treated SpongeBob. And at the time, no one was doing it. No one was approaching, creators as franchises. And the audience and the eyeballs were there. And it was something that was unique and different. So I think that you've seen this evolution where brand owners understand that, hey, licensing is an important strategy for me to extend my brand.
Funny thing is, I have one before I ask you my last question. The funny thing is, when you mentioned Tide, I was like, wait a minute, I've been using Tide my whole life without even thinking about it. And I guess that's the power of brands. You don't even think about it.
Right. So you're loyal to Tide, and you walk into a store and you see a spot remover marker that has Tide or is generic, you're going to get the Tide one because you're going to be like, oh yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Right. So the guys at Brandgenuity that are Church and Dwight's agent, right? The amount of cleaning. So Church and Dwight owns Arm & Hammer, right? Like the pandemic, because of all of the cleaning supplies, like that is not, wipes, antibacterial, like all of that stuff, Arm & Hammer, it's all licensed. As a consumer, and again, this is where like, because of Shark Tank, people are like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But you flip over the back of the package and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is made under license. I think consumers would be shocked to see the extent of items that are actually manufactured by licensees, by third party companies, not by the brand owner.
Okay, I gotta ask you because I usually didn't understand. Can you? And that's my last question. What is this Shark Tank story?
You know the show Shark
I know the
Tank?
show, but what's that have to do with the licensing part?
A lot of times when they're looking at companies and looking at making investments, like it's almost like a joke. More than half the time, Kevin or Damon will say, you don't want to be in the manufacturing business. This is a terrible idea. I'm going to take your idea and I'm going to license it. And we're going to, because everybody who's on Shark Tank is like, oh, I have this great concept, like it's the next glass, right? And it's like slightly bigger than the other glass. And it's like this. And like, you just see like Kevin and Damon and Rob, they roll their eyes and they're like, no, like if it's like what we're going to do is we're going to take your idea and we're going to license it and let someone else manufacture it and deal with the headaches and deal with the investment in inventory, and we'll collect a royalty. And that's when like the founders were like, no, I want to make my thing. I want to make my thing. So
Got
it's like,
it.
so what it's done is it's like, it's opened up the eyes to people that this idea of licensing is like a very, very real, very real thing. Big companies, ABG, Authentic Brands Group, right, who has sprung up basically buying distressed, bankrupt brands, right? A lot of retail brands, Brooks Brothers, and like brands like that, and they're not opening stores, they're not, manufacturing, they're licensing it all out.
Awesome. Well, this was a very enlightening conversation. As I said, we haven't had any guests who are from this industry or this field. So, Stone, thank you so much. I actually feel like we might have to do a follow-up catch-up.
Hey, I'm here as I continue to be in retirement. I got nothing but time for my kids and for you. I'd like to give the listeners at home a piece of advice.
Please.
Buy your Christmas presents now and early. The shipping crisis is real. It is going to be, if you do not plan now and get your kids, have your kids write their letters to Santa now, and go and be Santa's elves and get in the stores and buy products now. It is not a joke. Like, it is going to be bare shelves at Christmas.
Wow. That is I did not think about that either. So sometimes I feel like we just go along our lives and like these things happen and we don't even think about it, right? Like, but when you know the business and the industry behind it, it makes life kind of interesting.
Right. And you take it for granted. I mean, listen, I found it when I got out here to Philly, right? Like, just like, and look, I was always in the stores, like looking at the toy shelves and but here, like when you're restocking a house, which you'll find out, I had to go to 5 different stores to get 5 laundry hampers. It was like, cause it's affecting, it's not toys, it's affecting everything. Listen, hey, John, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. All right. Take care.